Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today we're looking at my Phalaenopsis Zhujiang Sapphire Baby Blue. This is an orchid that had already bloomed for me last year, and this year it's blooming as well. However, it's not blooming as well as last year, so I'm gonna share with you some of the guesses that I have on why, as well as to show you the same type of orchid grown by my family in Taiwan in a different way had actually much better results. So what you're seeing here are just some photos from last year's blooming. So essentially last year it produced 2 spikes, and if I remember correctly, one spike came out of the mother plant and then another spike came out of the baby plant. Yes, it's a mother-baby combo in the same pot. I didn't want to separate them. So last year the bloom counts and the spike counts obviously 2 versus 1 this year, and the blooms were many more from last year. So let's dive right into this year's photos and give you a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of this year, this orchid doing not as well as last year. Right off the bat, you can see there's only 1 spike this year. So beginning of May 2019 was when I discovered that this orchid was putting out a spike. And then about 2 or 3 weeks into the discovery, it started to grow another branch out of the main spike. So it was trying to branch out from the spike, so it was just trying to bloom, right, a little bit more. But eventually the branch died off. You'll see that later in the video. Also, I noticed that this orchid this year, the spike was skinnier and the growth speed was slower. But beginning of June 2019, it started to bloom. But that was already in my new environment because I moved to my house toward the end of May. So it might have something to do with the fact that it was growing spike while I was moving. So that may have to be one of the reasons. So change of environment. And then when you talk about change of environment, then you also have to talk about if they're facing the same side or same direction, getting the same kind of sunlight, or how many hours of sunlight, temperature, as well as humidity. And I can tell you pretty much all factors have some change. Right now, these orchids are southern facing, and I have some eastern facing exposure as well. But before, it was just purely north facing. So light exposure is dramatically different. And I went from the top floor to the first floor, right? Because I live in a 2-story single family home. So that is also very different. And the light source is also different. Like I said, right now they're getting southern exposure as well as eastern exposure. There is some western sun too, but it's not direct, and it's only maybe an hour and a half toward the late evening. And then humidity, that's another thing. My humidity in my house is lower because right now it's summertime and I have the AC on pretty much all the time. Even though I set the temperature to say 78 or so, the fact that it's going on all the time, it reduces a lot of humidity, takes out a lot of the humidity in the air. So I also have to use my humidifier quite a bit just to barely make 50%, and I think that also has something to do with it. So all of these factors, I think, all contributed to the underperformance of this orchid this year. Nonetheless, I still enjoy looking at the flowers. It's just that I was expecting for this orchid to at least have the same kind of performance from last year, but it just didn't do it. In terms of care, this orchid also received quarter strength fertilizer every single watering cycle except one time a month. I will use just water with no fertilizer to soak this orchid. This orchid is in semi-hydro right now, and since last year I kind of semi-improved it. I kind of repotted it, but I didn't take out the whole thing. I just kind of moved around the top third layer to kind of bury a few more aerial roots into the pot, and I think this year it needs to do that again because there aren't enough roots inside the media yet. I mean, later in the video you will see that there are some roots that are in the midpoint of the cup, around the midsection of the cup, but then there is no roots in the reservoir yet. And I think that is, to me, the best case scenario for semi-hydro. I have a few orchids that are already like that, having roots in the reservoir, reaching the bottom of the cup, and that is really the best thing because I get to have even more flexibility when it comes to the amount of water I give to those orchids. I don't always have to make sure the water is at the top of the drain or just underneath the drainage hole. Sometimes I only give them 1/8 of a cup because the roots are at the bottom, so as long as those bottom roots can take water for the entire orchid, I don't need to fill up the water as high as up to the drainage hole. And here you can see the branch portion of the spike just kind of dried up on its own. So I think along the way it just wasn't happy, and I think the move at the end of toward the end of May from my old apartment to my house, during the process too many things changed. So I think this orchid just, wasn't happy, was impacted negatively in a few ways probably. So just by looking at what's happening inside the container, I'm thinking after the flowers are done, I may also try to do a gentle repot. So I'll try to tilt this orchid and remove the top third layer of the pebbles and try to, bury deeper any area roots I can, and then my plan is not to take out the entire plant, but remove enough pebble on the top third layer or maybe the top quarter layer, and then just bury in the area roots into the media to help this orchid, get deeper and have more roots in the media to be able to absorb more water and nutrients. Another thing I noticed about this particular orchid type is that this orchid really loves water, and for this one particularly, for some reason, there is quite distinctive layering. The top quarter or 1/3 is always dry, and I think that's another reason potentially that's contributing to the underperformance of this orchid this year. But the good thing is that there are 2 roots that you see here that are trying to grow deeper. So these 2 roots will, hopefully they will, because that way this orchid will be able to reach the portion that has constant moisture and water to help this orchid get properly hydrated. And coming up, you're gonna see a couple photos shared with me by my family, and it's the same orchid type, except that this orchid is back in Taiwan. I bought this orchid a little bit over 2 years ago when I was visiting, and I left it with them because I couldn't take any plants into the US, obviously. So they grow this orchid on the balcony outside. They've never repotted it. Many leaves have grown and bottom leaves have shedded. That's why this orchid is growing taller and taller outside of the cup. But this orchid is still doing really well. In fact, this is the bloom that they get, right? I get it, the environment is completely different, but hey, this orchid has never gotten repot,
this orchid is also not getting fertilizer, and yet it's still growing fabulously. So sometimes, I ask myself, am I doing too much to my orchid that they are now so dependent on all these fertilizer and all these extra stuff that we're doing, right? So something for you to think about. This orchid is doing so well outside on its own, and sometimes my family forget to water it, and it's still doing okay. So just something to think about. What do you think?
This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!